Anyway, he got so drunk. I'm 15 or 16 years old. They wouldn't let him drive home. I went out with a team. I drove his car home from Olean. Didn't have a driver's license, didn't have a learner's permit, didn't have anything. I wouldn't want... I can't think of his name.
That was after this game? The Zimmerman game?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't even know my way back from Olean. See, I used to ride in the bus that Johnny Newman drove all the time, in the wagon, the station wagon.
Mm-hmm.
He, you know, he liked to play cards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he'd let me sit next to him and I'd play his cards for him.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy sitting in the second row would be playing, and he just took me under his wing like I was his son.
Something.
God, there's another story in Hornell. We used to stay in that old hotel. This was under Sanford's regime.
Mm-hmm.
The team was playing bad, and they went to, Newman liked to drink beer,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple other guys. They filled the bathtub up with water. They went and got some ice. Now, this was a real old hotel. It creaked, the floors creaked, and you had to go up a stairway, a wooden stairway. Anyway, they send me out to get a case of beer. And I come back in, I come in the back door, and who is sitting down in the lobby but Jack Sanford? He said, you know, I'm good enough to take, and I really felt bad. I'm good enough to take you on these trips. These guys are playing so bad. He wanted to put me in the game that night. They were playing so bad. He says, have we got anybody else here? And so I said, well, I'm sorry. Newman, the man that he was, went down and apologized to, he probably would never take me on a trip again, you know, and I just loved to go on those trips with those guys. And Newman went and said, you know, and he wasn't, he was one of them,
Yeah.
but he knew that he would get the least punishment if there was any dealt out.
Mm-hmm.
So he went down and said, it was my idea, Jack, and I sent Jim out for the beer. Somebody else, see, I wasn't old enough to get it, but somebody else went in and bought it, and then I had to bring it up. I don't know, they come in the front door, I guess. But I had to carry the beer up, and I got caught.
Okay, let's start. How did Jim Barone get started with baseball? Okay, go ahead.
Well, before I was bat boy, I worked in the concession with Ben Kerner and his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Kerner went on to buy the basketball team in the NBA after he left there.
St. Louis, right?
St. Louis Hawks, I guess it was at the time. And they also had the concession rights in Bradford. And some nights I would go, if there wasn't anything going on in Jamestown, I would go and work with them in Bradford. But if there was something in Jamestown, I worked as on the concession, selling peanuts and hot dogs and what have you at the ballpark.
So 1941, right?
Right.
First year they had the stadium?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, people that want to go to the ball games were down there at 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon lined up to go in there. A few years back, I made trips up here. Two of my grandsons have played in the Babe Ruth World Series at different times, and I didn't even see the interest in that I saw in 1941 and 42, and people literally fought for tickets to get to see the game.
Wow.
But those were some great years. I'll remember them as long as I live, even though I was just a bat boy, but I really got a big kick out of that.
Now, 1941, their first year, the bat boy was Jack Gallagher. Now, was that kind of an honored position?
Oh, yes. That was hard to get. And I got to know Jack pretty well when he was bat boy, having, being around the stadium as much as I was. And then we would get together at night after, on nights of a game, we would get together after and go over to Bicco Ice Cream. And we would sit around there and talk, and we played cards. And with the people that ran the place at that time. It was two brothers by the name of D'Angelo,
Mhm.
who I don't think are in the area anymore. But those were the...
And Jack would, at the end of 1941, decided he no longer wanted to continue being bat boy. And how did you ultimately get the job?
Well, I went and asked for it, and they had seen me around there
Mhm.
a lot, so I guess that's how I got it.
Who'd you ask?
Well, I think Jack Darling was the business manager, general manager. I also knew Harry Bisgeier pretty well because he was very close with Ben Kerner
Mhm.
and his mother,
Mhm.
who they lived in Buffalo, and I guess it was that's how Ben Kerner got the concession rights in Jamestown. And Harry, I guess, agreed to it also.
Tell me about Harry Bisgeier. What kind of guy was he?
What a great businessman.
Is that right?
I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was telling them how good a pitcher Shoup was, Charlie Shoup, and they said, well, how come he wasn't in the majors? I said, he was making as much money playing in Jamestown as a lot of players were making in the major leagues. Bisgeier paid him well, I know.
Mm-hmm.
See, a lot of the other players were out of college and trying to work their way into baseball. They didn't have as sophisticated farm systems then as they have now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, in as much as Harry owned the team, they had a working agreement with the Bisons.
Mm.
Frank Heller went up to the Bisons. He went back and forth there, and that was probably some of the.
Now, what was
guy-
Bisgeier's background?
He was in some kind of business in Buffalo, I guess.
Is there? Hey, Russ, do you know Jim Barone?
I wouldn't admit it, but
Okay.
Jimmy, good to see you.
Good to see you, Russ.
You're in good health, that's great.
We're swapping stories here. We're talking about Harry Bisgeier.
He was in some kind of business in Buffalo.
Mhm.
I don't know what it was, but that's how he got the inside track on buying the team when they came here. And he had a working agreement with Buffalo.
Jake Pittler, what's that mean to you?
Great guy. One of the most colorful men that I ever come in contact with. Well, Newman was a very colorful player, but he packed that stadium down there. After he finished coaching on third base there, they'd have to get a bushel basket, and everybody threw tobacco at him, you know. And they'd clean the field up, and they'd put all the tobacco in a bushel basket. But as bat boy, I also had to make sure that there was plenty of towels for the visiting team and all that. And Jake Pittler was one guy that always, before the team left, if they were here for 2 days or something, he always looked for me and he gave me, he called me a little Jew boy, and he always left a good tip with me. In those days, $15 and $20 was a lot of money, and it was nothing for him to. But I always liked Jake, and he was very colorful. But he put on a good show for the people. When Olean played in town, even if they were playing bad, they'd fill the stadium up because Jake Pittler was going to be there. And they'd come and they'd throw the tobacco out there, and he was a good baseball man.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he went up with the Dodgers as Greg did.
Somebody was telling me the story one time. Pittler got thrown out of a game, and he dressed and then bought a ticket to sit in the stands.
Yeah.
And went crazy from the stands. You talk about Johnny Newman. Give me some reminiscences of Johnny Newman.
He was just a great guy. I became very close to Johnny. When I traveled with the team, when they allowed me to travel with him, I always rode in the station wagon that he drove.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said before, they always played cards, especially if they were going up to Hamilton on a long trip or something like that. They'd get a card game going. And after the game, they always played in the hotel, but he had to drive the station. He drove one station wagon, and Greg drove the other, or else when Jack Sanford was there, he drove it. But Johnny Newman insisted that I sit next to him in the middle of the front seat, and I played his cards for him. I guess that's probably how I learned to play cards. I have to thank him for that.
So he's driving, you're in the front seat, the other guys are in the back seat, and you're kind
Yeah,
of...
and I'm getting coached from him because I'm either winning or losing his money for him. But he was, I always had a lot of respect for him. He was a great guy. He was very down to earth and
Good with the fans?
good with the fans.
Did he ever have any regrets? When he was in Jamestown, it was sort of the end of his career, more or less, wasn't it? Regarding what could have been, did he ever talk about...
Well, he knew it as well as anybody else. If he could have, if he had a little more speed, he could have been up in the majors. But where are you going to play him?
Yeah.
They tried him at first base, but he could play in the Pony League, and if he just come up to hit, he was worth his weight in gold. But he also filled the stadium up with people.
Yeah.
Because you never knew when he was going to hit that. You expected every time he come up to hit that ball over the fence. And there's one guy that I got to know pretty well that came in, I think the following year, and that was Tom Sass.
Mm-hmm.
He hit one of the, not the longest balls, but one of the most powerful balls that I ever saw hit out of the stadium down there. When that ball went over the left center field fence, it was still climbing. He had arms like this on him. And I got to know him because he went back to Toledo, and I have relatives. And in fact, my uncle was district attorney in Toledo for 25 years. And he became friendly with my uncle, but he joined the police department there, and he got shot point blank, right in the chest one time. He was going, when he was on the police department, he was going to look into a domestic fight of some kind, and the guy took the gun and shot him. He was a big, husky guy, but he couldn't hit a curveball. He would have been major league material. But he hit a ball out of that stadium. I saw Johnny Newman hit a lot of them, but when that ball went over the fence, it was still climbing. He had, like as I say, he had big arms, and he was...
How about some of the other players? Let me give you kind of a picture. Tell me a little bit more about some of these guys and maybe some thoughts you had on.
Karika, I think he was a third baseman. Rogala, I think he was with them when they were in Niagara Falls, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He was a good reliever. Charlie Plitt. Greg Malevy had to, obviously his parents never taught him the facts of life, but he would ask some of the damnedest questions. And so Greg Malevy was like a father to me. He said, Charlie, he says, when we're traveling, he said, you ride in the station wagon with me, and he says, I can enlighten you on some of the facts of life. He ended up marrying a girl from Jamestown, I think.
No kidding.
Or he was running with one. George Lurchin, speed, he could run like a deer. He reminded you of Joe DiMaggio in the outfield. I went to see him when he was playing with, after the war, he was playing with Toledo, with the Mud Hens. Zimmerman, of course, he was famous for that home run and to win the playoffs. Charlie Medler, boy, what a big guy he was. He, after he finished playing ball, he was a trainer for either Pittsburgh or Penn State, because he played football and baseball at either Pitt or Penn State. I don't remember now. Then he was in pro football for a while as a trainer or something like that. I read his name in programs, And
by the way, he's still alive. Not doing very well, but he's still alive.
Is he?
Near State College.
Hey, boy, he was strong. But I think he didn't go any further. He was on his way down because he was having arm trouble. Weinschreider, that's him in that picture with with in front of Dick Sherman's car. He was a real meek, mild. He was a country boy that never left home. He could have been a great ball player. I think he ended up going in the service. And McNair, I thought, was one of the greatest shortstops they ever had here. I mean, Weiberneck was good. McNair was good too.
Mm-hmm.
Swanson, I can't remember him too well, but I remember Jack Darling. He was. He always liked me. I always got along good with him. In fact, when school was out, he said, "Why don't you go and travel with the team?" He says. When he heard about the beer deal, he never said that anymore. That's
That was 42.
yeah. This with Sanford, I think, is 43.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Ernie Rovatic. Look at this picture here. This is priceless.
Russ, I just happened to have, we had a family get together and I brought a bunch of albums.
You know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Never had a picture of Allen Park, and there it is.
I've got if I'd have known about this, I've got a lot more pictures at home. In fact, I'll pack them up and send them up to you.
Love to see him. Love to see him. This is
Yep.
about Lyle Parkhurst. He had to be about your age when he was pitching, wasn't he?
I think he was, he might have been a year or two older than me.
But he was a kid. I mean, pretty much on that team.
Yeah.
wasn't
He didn't hit it off too well with the players at first because they thought he was a bit of a smart aleck. But after he played a little bit and they cooled him down,
Mm-hmm.
you know how the veterans treat a rookie. It's the same in just about anything they do. But he was pretty well accepted after he was with them for a while. I had a hard time collecting my clubhouse dues from him. Was it Johnny Newman went up to him once and he put his finger in his face. He says, "If I hear that you owe this guy any more money," he says, "I'm going to put you right through that wall."
It's nice to have an enforcer like that. Oh, my God. Well, you know, it's kind of just an aside. Gallagher was talking about the same thing. Some guys that were a little cheaper than others, and Gallagher talked, and he goes, "The guy at the end of the table there was probably the cheapest one we had, and it was Pollock." Johnny was at the luncheon when Gallagher was talking. But ultimately, they had to have their socks and they had to have their uniforms. So I mean, it's like you had a lien. You know, they still had to deal with you.
Oh God, and I also, because they wouldn't buy a lot of towels, I also used to take the towels home and wash them. My mother almost killed me.
Oh.
You know, and I'd be up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes if they had a 3-4 game stay at home.
So you're wearing down your mom's washing machine.
But they paid me, you know, God, I was making, for a young kid, I was making pretty good money then.
Greg Malevy, what kind of guy was he?
Real good baseball man, baseball sense. He knew when it was time to joke and he knew when it was time to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I always respected him. Well, he was, I think you might call him the father or grandfather, whatever, of baseball here once they got into, you know, they got pro baseball here. He had, you know, he had a thing that he could do. And I played a little ball myself, and boy, I tried to do that. He could get up to the bat. He'd get up there and he'd choke up a little bit on the bat, and he could, if you needed a ball just to go over the infield someplace, you could go to the bank with him. He did that playing with Buffalo too, but boy, that was, I guess it's not everybody that could do it, but he had a knack for doing that. He'd just choke up on that bat and he'd just go back a little bit and boom, right over the infield. Got that runner on third base and he comes home.
Do you have a whistle? Do you have a distinctive whistle?
Yep. You know, he whistled between his teeth like that. And when he wanted your attention as a player or anybody, he wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
If it was time to play, he'd let you know when it was time to be joking around. If the team was playing good, he was more lenient. But when it was time to settle down, and he knew he had very good, I always, even as a young kid, I learned a lot about baseball through him and from guys like Greg Malevy. He was, had great baseball sense.
There discipline
he was-
problems on the team? I mean, you hear about that stuff
He
now.
did.
Was there much?
He'd take a guy under his wing like Charlie Plitt, you know, and he would teach him the facts of life.
Mm-hmm.
He heard he was monkeying around with young girls around town, and so he'd take him under his wing and try to get him to go on the straight, narrow path.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was a young kid, I think he had 1 or 2 years of college when he came here, but he had a lot of potential. And see, I forget who owned him, but they sent him down mainly because Greg was here. They figured that Greg could, you know, tutor him along.
In 1942, tell me what effect the war years. I mean, here you are in Pearl Harbor's December 1941. You're the bat boy during the 1942 year. It looks like the team was pretty loaded as far as having players in 42, but the real effect occurred probably after that year as far as players.
Well, it's no secret that Bisgeier went out shopping, and Bisgeier spent money on players. Well, Heller, he could have played in the International League. Shoup could have played elsewhere. Somebody saw these pictures the other day that was up at the cottage with me, and well, if that guy was so good, why wasn't he up in the major leagues? I said he could have played in the major leagues, but he was making as much money here,
Mm-hmm.
and he liked it here. He liked the area. I don't remember his wife. Oh, but I remember Newman's wife. She was she was from Kentucky, you know. This isn't on there, is it? You goddamn fat ass, she says. He'd stop over and get an ice cream cone before he came to the ballpark, and he'd come walking in there, and she'd get all over him about it. She says, "You're going to be so damn fat." He said, "You can't tie your shoelaces now." She was tough. Very outspoken.
Mm-hmm.
Very good-looking woman.
Yeah. Then came along the 1943 team. If you look at that roster, as you look at the names, do any of them have some memories to you? A couple names that we did a little bit of research on. One was Ernie Rovatic. Do you have any recollections of Ernie?
Quiet, a very quiet, I'm assuming, guy, but he liked Lurchin. When he was running out in the outfield, I thought he looked like Joe DiMaggio. He really was smooth, and he was a pretty good sticker, too.
Call them solid folks. I think that was
Yep.
a nickname I saw.
He was very quiet, and I think that immediately after he played here, he went in the service, and I think he got killed in the service.
You did.
See, shortly after that, of course, I graduated and I went into service, and I lost track of a lot of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a real nice guy. He was a little bit of a loner, but he wasn't the kind of a guy that a lot of those he was a little older too, see. A lot of those younger guys, as soon as the ball game was over, where are we going to go and hang out tonight and stuff like that. But he kept pretty much to himself, and he was strictly a baseball player.
What about Bob Vetter? Does that name ring a bell?
From Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Hell of a hot temper, but boy, he could throw that ball when he wanted to. I had something on him. I had him autograph a picture, and I had his address. I used to correspond with him. I think he became a teacher in Buffalo.
Could be. There's a story. He's still around.
He's when he went back to Buffalo, I don't think he was playing baseball anymore. Maybe he went in the service too. I'm not sure. But he had a lot of potential.
Apparently pitched a no-hitter in 1943 on the road, so he may not have been there. In Bradford, I believe. And as the story comes down, and it's part of the folklore of folklore of baseball, but it occurred in 1943, was that when he went into the town, the catcher had been hurt, the Falcons catcher, and of course you carried how many, 15 players? I mean, there weren't a lot of players.
Yeah, they had a couple guys that could catch and play other positions.
So, as the story goes, he goes into Bradford, and they had to, they didn't have a catcher. So they signed up, there was an electrician in the area from the Olean who was a semi-pro catcher, and brought him in, signed him for the game, literally, pitched, caught the game, and Vetter threw a no-hitter that game.
That wasn't Sutherland.
I don't know.
The guy that ended up marrying the girl that was married to Vic Pearson. You know, the guy that bought Maplehurst for Howard Holmes, or Wally Holmes.
Bought it for him, Vic Pearson?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was tied up with, this girl's father owned one of the factories. She married Sutherland. Then I think he got killed in an automobile accident, but he caught here. That might have been the latter part of 43, it might have been 44. I was wondering if that was the one you were referring to.
Could be. I never got the name of the substitute catcher.
Big guy.
Yeah.
Jane, what the heck is her name? Her father had Royal Upholstery. Or was it Union National?
I didn't know her, maybe.
Quite a name around town.
Nords, Johnson. The Johnsons had Union National for a while.
She married Vic Pearson.
Yeah, after Sutherland died, she married Vic Pearson.
That's the only way I know her.
But her folks had one of the factories. Might have been, I thought it was Royal Upholstery or one of those factories. But he was a big guy. He was rough.
Yeah.
You never ran into him. You know, if you're running into home plate, you stopped.
Jack Sanford. What do you remember about Jack Sanford?
Well, Jack Sanford, of course, followed Greg Malevy, and he was, let's face it, he was no Greg Malevy. He was a good baseball man, but he didn't have the material that Greg Malevy had either, in all fairness to him.
Partly because of the war?
I think that had a lot to do with it. Of course, this would be the same for all the other teams.
Who owned the club in 43?
I think they had a working agreement with the St. Louis Cardinals because Andy French was the business manager. And when Andy French came here, he tightened up the strings on everything. I no longer traveled with the team. They were, it was a little different ball game with the St. Louis Cardinals. They sent a couple players here that weren't bad. But I went to Lynchburg to spring training that year.
Oh, did you?
I went with Dick Sherman, and Harry Bisgeyer said, if you want to go, you can go with Dick Sherman, and he says your expenses will all be paid. But they had one or two other of their minor league teams there. And I think one was Johnson City. And by the time they left spring training, they sort of put the players into the team that would fit into the classic, you know, the better players and the higher classification of the league. Here's some others in the lesson. As I said before, I happen to have these in a couple albums that I had with some of my, that I was going to show some of my relatives.
Yeah.
But I've got a lot more pictures at home.
I'd love to see him.
Did you know Bill Nutt?
No.
Years ago, he played with, he played basketball around the Y a lot, and he played with, when the guy that played at St. Bonnie played. But he played in this with the steel partitions with Jack Fulford and all
Mhm.
those guys. The big guy, he's about 6'4". He lives in Melbourne now.
No, sir.
I showed him a lot of these pictures. He's younger than I am, and he got a big kick out of him. Well, I think he played when Steel Partitions had a good
He
team.
played in Monterocco, and I played with him for several years.
Oh, did ya?
Yeah. Married to Tranquist girl.
Yep. You wouldn't recognize her now,
No.
Russ. She's just been declared totally blind, and
Shame.
and then they have a boy. Their youngest boy is schizophrenic,
Mm.
and talk about somebody that has her hands full. His wife, she doesn't leave the house, and she's been diabetic since she was a young girl. I don't know how many of these treatments for the eyes, those
Laser treatment.
laser treatments, didn't do any good.
What about, you mentioned Dick Sherman, what about some of the characters at the ballpark? Tell me about Dick Sherman.
Dick Sherman, of course, he had that reserve box down there.
Mm-hmm.
And God, if Dick Sherman wasn't there, I don't think they'd start the ball game. He was that much a part of it, and he got to know all the players real well, and they all. I guess he was the number one, next to Judge Barger.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about Judge Barger.
Well, I used to work at the humidor in the wintertime,
Oh, did you?
and just before I went into service, I borrowed a friend's car, and I was trailing my boat up the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And a rookie on the police force was hiding on Jones and Gifford Avenue, and
Hiding.
yeah, he was. And I got a ticket for speeding. Well, Judge Barger always smoked a certain cigar. I don't remember what they were now, but you didn't always get all the good cigars that you wanted, and so we always had a box under the counter that was personal stock just for Judge Barger. He was a nice old guy, too. Well, anyway, when I come up in court, he laughed like hell. So this was on a weekend, and I come up in court on Monday, and he knew I was going in the service. He adjourned. He adjourned the case for 2 months. Well, when my case come up, I read about it in the Stars and Stripes. My dad sent me the write-up after he dismissed the case after. But he was, he loved baseball.
And he was instrumental in sort of having the stadium erected.
Yes, I think he had a lot to do with it.
What about Ernie Kessler?
Ernie Kessler, I didn't know too well. I knew that he was always in baseball circles. He might have even been on the committee at the time. He was a staunch supporter of,
Mhm.
of baseball. But Dick Sherman, I know he's outstanding anyway with that handlebar mustache. And
Were there other characters that you can recall, fans who were...
the guy that I drove his car home from Olean is, I can't think of his, Jack. God, it's on the tip of my tongue. He was Quarles,
Mhm.
Jack Quarles. They wouldn't let him drive the car home, and they wouldn't let any of the ball players were going to have a party in Olean someplace after the game. That's when we went to the party. Of course, this guy had more to drink. I drove his car home, Russ. I didn't have a driver's license. The only driving I'd ever done was my dad's car in the driveway, I'm 15 years old. And I don't know, but he lived up on the north side in But I got him home, and then I left his car there, and I had to walk home. I lived down on Maple Street at the time. Jack Quarles, Dick Sherman.
Your guy rang a bell, had a bell or some sort of, I read someplace.
Kenny Graham and Phil Roselli were quite ardent. Kenny Graham originally came from Bradford. Of course, the Hot Stove League always met the next morning over at the Humidor, you know, and they either they played the game over again and what you should have done and what you shouldn't have done.
Is that where, do people live, where did the ball players live at the time? Did they live at the Y? Did they live at the...
A lot of them lived at the Y, most of them. See, there was a few of them that were married. Shoup was married. Newman was married. O'Neill got married after. Most of them lived at the Y, and then there was some people that a few people took them in as, as boarders.
Did
But,
they make much money then? Do you recall?
God, there was some guys making, just trying to get in. You know, if they, especially when St. Louis had them, they had some kids that they had picked out of high school or college. They weren't making $200 a month. And they lived, they had to live very, as cheap as they could. They didn't have a lot of money to blow. I think the manager, if the business manager or the general manager didn't go on the road trip, I think the manager gave out meal money. Newman, he never had enough meal money. He could eat.
He ate a lot, huh?
Yeah. And Newman was paid well when he played here, too. Bisgeier took good care of him. Because, well, eventually I think he went up to Hamilton and played for a year or two. I think he was player manager up there.
Were you involved when the Boston Braves came in for an exhibition game? Do you recall that?
I was I don't think I was bat boy then, but I have a baseball that I got from them. It was autographed by all the Boston team.
Jerry Lawson. Remember Jerry? Did they do radio back at that time? Do you recall anybody doing radio reports?
God, he was a radio announcer, wasn't he? Yeah, I think they did. Fred Smith was the announcer for many years. I saw Fred Smith a few years ago. I don't know where it was. I think I was here watching one of my grandsons play in the Babe Ruth World Series, and I ran into him. He was always very close with Greg Malevy, but he was the PA announcer for many years. He was with Millcraft Paper, I think. He's not around anymore?
He died about 2 years ago.
Oh, did he? But he followed Greg. He corresponded with him even when he went out to Los Angeles.
When young Greg would come back to visit, he would visit and stay with us.
Oh, he would with Fred Smith. One night,
Where he was when we interviewed him.
there was a guy that was an umpire. He later was an agent. He worked on the thruway up there in Dunkirk or Fredonia. Sully. I am probably the only bat boy that ever got thrown out of a game. And I was put up to it by somebody else. I can't remember if it was Greg Malevy or Jack Sanford. You know, we always had to keep them with bowling balls, with baseballs. And he was doing a bad job one night, and whoever was in the dugout was all over him. And I'm standing right there, and he thought it was me. So when he needed more baseballs, I stood in the dugout, and I was throwing them to him out at the behind home plate. And somebody said something else. He come over and he said, "You," and he pointed to me. out. I think it was Jack Sanford. Jack had an awful temper. He was very temperamental. And you know, and when the team was playing bad, he wasn't fit to live with.
Mm-hmm.
He went on to manage someplace else, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he.
Bradford, maybe?
They were with Buffalo. Of course, Jamestown had a working agreement with Buffalo, but I think Buffalo was affiliated with Tigers.
Tigers, that's right.
And I think he went to another farm team in the Detroit system. But he came in, and he was a good baseball man, I thought, you know, in my young, inexperienced way. But Greg Malevy was a tough act to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people expected the same from Jack Sanford, and I can't say that he wasn't as good a manager as Malevy. I just don't think he had the same material.
Yeah, the charisma either.
No, that's true.
1942, that year, we had more people come to see ball games than ever in Jamestown. And I think that's probably still a record in the New York Penn League, or Pony League. I mean, I just think 142,000 people, and that's utterly incredible. As many people there.
How many? 142,000?
42,000 that year. And, I can't even envision it. But what did they do? What did they do when they had overflow crowds? Where did they put them?
Well, they put, when they first started, they didn't have as many bleachers as they did when they ended up. They put in more bleachers. They went out in left field, and they went out in right field with more.
And they were another tier higher than they are now. They were 15 high, I think, in most cases.
Yeah.
Or another tier higher.
I don't. But when the Red Sox came in for that exhibition, they had a big crowd there. I can't remember who was. Well.
You mean the Boston Braves?
Yeah, the Boston
Braves.
not the Red Sox.
They ripped the fence off for the in Detroit. Outfield.
Yeah.
About 10 or 15 feet in the outfield where people stood up against the fence. All the way around.
I think it was Jerry Lawson talking about that Boston Braves exhibition game that Paul Wainer came.
Yep.
And Paul had just got his 3,000th base hit, so that was a big deal. And here they are. When you think about it, here's a major league team rolls into a Class D stadium to play an exhibition game.
They were amazed to see the number of people that were there themselves.
Yeah.
How did they get the Boston Braves to come in? I don't know what the connection was there. See, they weren't one of their farm teams. I think they had been to another city in the Pony League the day before, and they came here.
Makes sense.
I don't remember exactly, but I think it had something to do with that. They were near the area. Maybe they were in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why they would have been in Buffalo, but
Well, it's kind of a coup when you think about it.
yeah.
Even when you think about the Tigers coming here in '46, which was a huge event. Again, you got a major league team coming to a Class D. I mean, the lowest minor league team. And Yakum, you know, John Yakum's career, he didn't pass years.
I wasn't here then.
You know, we talk about how they brought in their 3 top pitchers for the Detroit Tigers pitched against Jamestown. I mean, it's just unheard of.
Yeah.
And today, you can't get the major league team to go visit their
Contract.
Triple-A team.
Mm-mm.
You know, the Cleveland Indians were up in Buffalo, and they were the hue and cry about having to go down to play one game in Buffalo. Was just
And it's not a long trip either.
no, it's not a long trip, and they brought in Class A pitchers to pitch. You got to see Albert Bell and that, but the pitchers certainly none of the pitchers pitched. I mean, they wouldn't waste it on that. It's a whole different era. And it sounds like you had a lot of fun.
Oh, I did. When I think back about it now, I was lucky to, not everybody could have been the bat boy, and I had the experiences that I had there. And
You've always, how'd you get a job?
See, you know, Greg just asked me the question, and Dick Sherman liked me, and he had a lot of pull, and Harry Bisgeier liked me, and Ben Kerner hated to see me leave the concession stand, but Greg, I knew Greg, you know, hanging around. I was around the state. I'd go watch batting practice. You know, I'd go early and watch him warm up and all that, and I really can't. I don't remember, Russ.
Did Jack choose not to do it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was, well, I think he went in the service.
Hmm.
Or he went away to school. I can't remember now. He might have recommended me too, because we were pretty good friends.
You'd enjoy talking to him.
Yeah, I'm gonna look him
he's
up.
Still a hoot, yeah. He's in the phone book. But yeah, he
The
comes.
Greenhurst, right, of course, we're living here.
Greenhurst Trail, right? Yeah, he's been to a couple of the meetings, and we did the same thing that we did with you. And all you guys have great stories, and it's marvelous.
See, I think when he was there, it was the first year at the stadium.
Mm-hmm. And before that, it was, of course, Allen Park in 1940, and then Selron was the real first year.
Yeah.
1939.
As a kid, I went to a few of those games.
Sorry?
But like I say, I worked the concessions the first year down there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ben Kerner, when I heard that he went, him and his mother used to fight like the Diggins. You know, Jewish families, how they don't agree on everything, and when they don't agree on something, they just argue. Oh, they would get in some terrible. And then his sister was there too. She was in on it, Sylvia. And they would get in some arguments that wouldn't end, and I just sort of walk away. And but then when I heard that he bought the St. Louis Hawks, he kept it for 3 or 4 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is he still alive? Do we know?
Don't know.
I was wondering about that too.
We've been trying to track down some of the old ball players to see who's around. Sam D'Amico is still alive up in Buffalo.
Is he?
Mm-hmm. Somewhat failing, but he's still alive. I told you, Charlie Medler.
Is Bisgeier still around?
No, he died in the 50s.
Did he?
Or no, maybe a little bit later than that. Oh, one name I want to ask you about, Stuart McGuire. Was he around when you were around? He was the Post-Journal writer. Does that ring any bells?
I know Wade Forsythe was.
Okay.
I really can't remember. If Frank Hyde was here, Frank Hyde came.
He was before Frank.
When did Frank Hyde come on the scene here?
Mid-40s.
47, 6 in my mind.
Oh. He used, I think he was. I think he used to ride to some of the, Dick Sherman would go to a lot of the road games. And I think he used to ride to a lot of the games with Dick Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He was sort of a big guy, and I think he smoked cigars.
Mm-hmm. Don't know.
Yeah.
He
I forgot about him.
Stuart McGuire, in the history of this, was the guy that sat at a meeting in 1939 and actually laid down some money to get a franchise. I mean, he was the guy, and he was the Post-Journal sports editor at the time, and he got the franchise in Selron. And then 3 weeks later, he couldn't afford it, and he sold it to the Pirates. But anyways,
I think that now I recall.
He was sort of the guy that got it all going.
Russ, you know how long ago they're talking about now?
Adding up, Jim.
And you're so lucid. This is what's terrific.
Amazing.
And,
Oh, God. You know, when you start talking about it, it brings back some memories. Do you know Augie Erickson? He used to live here.
Mhm.
Hell, I bowled with him for over 20 years. He lives across the road from me now. And we get together once in a while and we start talking. Of course, he was a soccer player.
Go ahead, you can tell the story. It's all being recorded.
But
He played soccer at Elm Park with those guys?
yeah, he came from Sweden. He was a good soccer player in Sweden, I guess. He lives across. I bowled with him. We bowled on the same team for about 20 years.
See, they just tore his restaurant down in the corner of Windsor and Second. We said that.
No, this
Is that
this is the
different?
Augie Erickson that used to work at Weber Knapp.
Oh, Erickson. I'm
Short
sorry,
guy.
Carlson. Augie Erickson.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I'm saying Carlson. No,
He
Erickson.
lives in Florida. I think he lives down around Fort
Yeah,
Lauderdale.
that's what I thought of when you said that. Oh, Erickson.
That's George Carlson's father.
Father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
You're saying Erickson.
yeah, a little short guy.
Mm-hmm.
He lived across the road from me.
You've got a lot of good memories. You're gonna ID, are these all your pictures and stuff?
Yeah.
You gotta ID all those people. Your kids and grandkids will love you if you put their
Oh,
names
I know
on
it.
one. Make sure that while you're, it said lucid, sit down and all, especially these.
I wrote on back of some of them.
Write the names.
These pictures,
names of these people.
Russ, a lot of these pictures were in a flood. That's why they're.
Uh-huh.
I had them loose, and they were in a flood. Then I put them in this album.
Beautiful to have these.
This is the guy that was a #1 fan, the guy that owned the humidor, Peter Lofgren.
Yeah, that's a great picture that you own.
Yeah. He come from the South someplace, and he wasn't. When he went to Rice, he wasn't far from home. And when he came here to play ball, that was about as far as they had ever been from home, not knowing anybody else. When he was at the NCAA, he was with guys that he had played with all year, and you know he wasn't a very outgoing guy, but he had a lot of talent. And they really, now that you mention it, they really had their work cut out for him in trying to keep him here. He was one of the few guys that came here that I think got a bonus for signing. And that's another reason why they didn't want him to get homesick and go home. But he was probably one of the best athletes that I saw come to Jamestown. He could play ball too, but I never saw him play basketball. I read about him. I read about the standing ovation he got when he come off the floor in the NCAA tournament at Madison Square Garden.
Now, what did Bisgard do to make Carswell happy?
Oh, I think he gave him a little more money.
Did he bring the family up?
I think before long they came up. They said, look, you stay here. I don't know what went on in the inner circles, see. A lot of what I got was third-hand information. What the hell, I was just a little, the little bat boy, and that really wasn't any of my business. But I became friendly with him, maybe in an effort to try to make him feel at home, because after all, I was the only guy that lived in town, that was a native of Jamestown. And but he stayed, and he went up after he left Jamestown for a short while, but I think he also went in the service. He went into a higher class league because they were trying to tutor him along. They had a lot of, but he was a good athlete. He was very smooth. He shuffled he shuffled around the infield very gracefully, and he had a good bat. He was a good prospect.
Carswell's mentioned in Bisgard's obituary. They talk of all the things that Bisgard did, in Buffalo and all over the place, and they talk about the New York Penn League, but they highlight, in fact, the kind of guy they were talking about is Bisgard's character. They talk about Frank Carswell, how he was homesick, and what Bisgard did was to call for and to pay for the expenses of his mother to come up here in 1942 to be with Carswell, so Carswell could continue to play that year.
No, there's a lot of people that had a misconception about Bisgeier. He did a lot of things behind the scenes. He was ridiculed, like they do in owner. You might bring a player in and they hear that he paid a lot of money for him or something like that, and then he doesn't pan out. Well, that's not the guy's fault. He probably forked over some good money for that. It was just a gamble, but he did as much as anybody would have done to bring a good team here to Jamestown. I'll say that much. I didn't realize it at the time, being as young as I was, but when I think back, and then I saw the players and I saw the equipment they had in other cities, Jamestown was the class of the, I say they were the class of the league. But I didn't realize it at the time.
Baseball's all done. You go to the service, you come back, all of a sudden Jim Barone finds himself in a whole new field, whole new athletic field. And in about 5 minutes, can you give me the Jim Barone story in bowling?
Well, my wife was Sam Manella's daughter, and as strange as it seems, my wife's mother and my mother were in the hospital at the same time having us. And the same doctor delivered us. And we met in high school in Dent Moon's algebra class, and we started going together. And when I come home from overseas, she was going to University of Buffalo State Teachers College. When I got discharged, she decided she wasn't going to continue. She had plans to be a teacher, but she quit that and she went to work. And I went to work down Blackstone, and we found ourselves out on strike more than we were working, and I was raising a family, and Benny Book hired me to work in the bowling alleys, not Sam. And that was in 1947 I was manager of the Bowlerdrome in Faulkner. I worked there till about 1953. And Sam was going to put the pin spotters in at Pine Street. And I went away to the pin spotter school in Shelby, Ohio to be the mechanic. A few years later, in 1959, they decided to build a new bowling center, move the leagues from the Palladium to what was going to be the Satellite Bowl, and I went up there as the assistant manager. Fortunately, Sam passed away in 1967. His wife passed away just before the place was opened. I could never say a bad word about either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
My parents never mistreated me, and they treated me just like my parents did.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very nice people. And I moved up on the south side, so I'd be near the work. And we had Kathy, and we had Patty. And after Sam passed away, I had a couple other partners that were in the business with him who wanted out, and I bought their shares. And eventually I was the major stockholder. And in 1985, I sold the business and moved to Florida. And that's where I've been ever since. I'm now working about 15 hours a week, 16 hours a week in a bowling center just to keep busy. And a great deal of things have changed since then.
You did an awful lot to popularize bowling in the area. Satellite Bowl was the premier spot to bowl.
See, my family and our family was very much involved in it. If the business went good, we ate good. If the business didn't go good, we didn't eat good. And my kids like to eat. I do too, and that's about the way you can sum it up. See, most other places, there are several stockholders, and they didn't have, I don't say they didn't have any interest in it, but they didn't have the kind of interest in it if you're involved with it yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah, I had a lot of good experiences in Jamestown.
You brought in some big name bowlers, and clearly the cancer bowlathon is your idea, and it's been an unbelievable fundraiser.
Yeah. My daughter Patty still helps out with it, and it's still they're raising a lot of money.
Mhm.
It's a good. I have a couple guys that used to come here to bowl who are now on the senior tour.
Okay.
And when the tour is in Florida, they come and stay with me, and they come and work out during the day at the bowling center that I work at.
Who's that?
Allie Clark and Ron Amore.
Oh, yeah.
They just, Allie just joined the senior tour 2 years ago. So when the finals come up on weekends, when the playoffs come up, wherever it is, they start down in Naples and then go up to Sarasota, St. Petersburg, then they go to West Palm Beach. On the weekends, I go and watch them. I get a big kick out of it.
That's terrific. Now, another house here used to bring in was it 10 pins that would have that national
Golden
champion?
Trail.
That was called?
Yeah. See, they were affiliated with a couple other bowling centers, one in Buffalo, one in Erie, and the pro bowlers at that time didn't have as many tournaments to get into as they do now, and so they would come and make one, and they had a regular tour that they made.
Mm-hmm.
We were affiliated with them for 1 year.
This has been terrific.
Chief Halftown used to come up to your place too, didn't he?
Yep. I'm going to stop and see him Sunday on my way back.
Okay. He's still in Philadelphia.
He's in Philadelphia, but during the summer, he isn't work. See, he's the guy that told me to go to work for Brunswick. See, the center that I work at is owned and operated by a division of Brunswick Corporation. It's called BRC, which is Brunswick Recreation Centers. So he called me up after I sold the place, and he said, "What are you doing?" I was living in Hollywood at the time. My brother talked me into going to Hollywood. My brother's been in North Miami for about 50 years now, ever since he interned down there and stayed there. So I went down there for a couple of years, and I didn't like it. I said, "Oh boy, now I'm going to go to Florida. I'm going to play golf every day." Well, that lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and now what do we do? So Halftown arranged interview with me with the regional vice president of the southeastern region of Brunswick in Atlanta. So they said, "Well, we've got a house in Fort Lauderdale, but we've got one of our top 10 in the United States is in Melbourne." He said, "Why don't you go up there?" I said, "I've been thinking of moving to Melbourne." I had been up there visiting Augie Erickson a couple of times, and he said, "You'll like that a lot better." So when I moved up to Melbourne, I went to work in there. I work about 16 hours a week, and it's a lot of fun. I don't have to pay any bills at the end of the month, and I've made friends with a lot of the bowlers. They come in the pro shop before they bowl, and we shoot the baloney. And I had a strange. Is this still on?
It is. You want to turn it off?
Yeah.
Okay. This is 1940 Allen Park. Note the soccer goals, the flagpole, which is right over the right shoulder of the third base coach, and the grandstands. You'll notice the tarp and the one tree Nowadays, in Allen Park, the whole area is located with trees. It's the only picture we know of Allen Park when it was played in the New York Penn League. George Kobe, a pitcher. (1943) manager, Jack Sanford. Infielder, Lloyd Lowe. Outfielder, Otis Davis. Elmer Weinschreider, in front of a vehicle owned by Dick Sherman, longtime fan. Frank Carswell, who was the third baseman in the 42 team. Jack Darling, the business manager in 1942. Dick Sherman, avid fan. Charlie Shupp and Lyle Parkhurst. Jim Barone, together with George Lurchin. Pat McNair. Charlie Medler. The trainer of 1942, Doc Sands. Business manager, Sam Amico. Manager, Greg Malevy. Johnny O'Neill. Charlie Shoup. George Zimmerman, with Johnny Newman in the background, checking the bats. Bat boy Jim Barone. Otis Davis. group of jokers. Standing up, Elmer Weinschreider and Charlie Plitt. Middle row, Al Superville and George Lurchin. And kneeling, Ted Weibernack. Lyle Parkhurst. Chet Koveka. Ben Kerner's concession crew. This is a team of Swanson, Delaney, Schaefer, Rogala, and Weibernack. There's Johnny Newman giving lefty Lyle Parkhurst some tips. There's Rogala on the left of the picture and Dick Schmidt on the right. Fun-loving trio of Pat McNair, Stan Rogala, and Ted Weibernack.